Hello and welcome once again to Travel in Chinese. I'm Mark Rosewell, also known as Dashan. Beijing has been the capital of China for hundreds and hundreds of years, including the last two imperial dynasties. So it's no surprise that many of the tourist sites in Beijing have to do with the emperor, like the Forbidden City, or the Temple of Heaven, or the Summer Palace. Many sites in Beijing are also on a huge scale, like the Great Wall of China or Tiananmen Square. But today we're going to explore a smaller, more down-to-earth side of Beijing. Those are the narrow alleyways of old Beijing called Hutong. Let's take a look at today's dialogue.
我们今天走了这么长时间，我都快累死了。
那我们到前面坐会儿再走吧。好。
看，我买了一本介绍中国建筑的书，不错吧？
我看看。哎，真不错，还有好多图片呢。
啊，你看四合院，我一直对这种建筑很感兴趣。你以前住过四合院吗？
没有，我们家以前一直住在楼房里，不过我有朋友就住在四合院里。
说到四合院，我还想起一件有意思的事情来呢。
什么事情啊？看把你乐的。
我刚到中国的时候，有一天闲着没事儿，觉得闷得慌，我就顺路溜达到一个小胡同去了。
那里边很窄吧？
没错，里边有一个院子，开着门，我就忍不住走进去看看。
真的吗？有人撵你吗？
没有，不过里面出来了一个人，问我您找谁，吓得我赶紧溜掉了。
碰了个钉子吧？
这我倒不在乎，只可惜我没有机会好好看看那个院子。
你这么感兴趣的话，不如我带你去个地方看看好了。
那太好了。
我说的地方离这儿倒不远，要不我们现在就过去看看。
好，我们走吧，走。
哎，雪梅，这就是我说的地方。
这里的胡同可真多啊！我们从哪儿开始呀，我的导游小姐？
俗话说，这北京啊是有名的胡同3600，无名的胡同赛牛毛。
你还真像这么回事儿。
往这儿走，这些呀都是四合院。
咱走近点看看。
好啊。
这里是门墩吗？
对，不同的门墩啊就有不同的意思。你从门墩就可以知道这家人是做什么工作的。
原来是这样的。
走，咱们进去看看。
好。那一个四合院里可以住4家人吗？
那可不一定。原来啊，有钱的人是一家人住一个或者几个四合院，没钱的人呢是很多家人合住一个四合院。
那这儿的四合院还和以前一样吗？
不，已经啊有很大不同了。大部分四合院的格局都已经改变了。
哎，你看，那还有空调。我觉得四合院的生活也变得现代化了。
嗨，在我看来，这儿无论怎么变，都是北京生活最重要的代表。
Xue Mei tells a story about when she first arrived in China. 闲着没事儿, I had nothing to do, or I was bored, unoccupied. 闲 is to be idle, unoccupied, to have nothing to do. 觉得闷得慌. Now this is a colloquial expression. The key word is 闷, to be bored, in low spirits.
我刚到中国的时候，有一天闲着没事儿，觉得闷得慌，我就顺路溜达到一个小胡同去了。
Since you're so interested, 不如我带你去一个地方看看吧. Here, 不如 is used to show an option, such as, it would be better if I take you to see some place. 离这儿到不远. Again, the 到 indicates that something may be unexpected. It's actually not far from here. Note that here, 到 should be pronounced fourth tone, 到, not in the third tone, 倒, as we saw in a previous lesson. 倒 has a completely different meaning, to fall over, to topple. But where do you start the tour of Beijing Hutongs? As her friend says, there's an old saying, 有名的胡同3600, there are 3,600 famous Hutongs. 无名的胡同赛牛毛, there are as many non-famous Hutongs as there are hairs on a cow. 赛 is to compete with. Here, the number of Hutongs can compete with the 牛毛, the number of hairs on a cow. That's an awful lot.
你这么感兴趣的话，不如我带你去个地方看看好了。
那太好了。
我说的地方离这儿倒不远，要不我们现在就过去看看。
好，我们走吧，走。
哎，雪梅，这就是我说的地方。
这里的胡同可真多啊！ 我们从哪儿开始呀，我的导游小姐？
俗话说，这北京啊是有名的胡同3600，无名的胡同赛牛毛。
你还真像这么回事儿。
The Hutong and 四合院 have changed with the times. 格局都已经改变了。格局 is a pattern or structure. The design, here would be the layout. The layouts have already changed. 格局都已经改变了。四合院的生活也变得现代化了。Life in a courtyard home has also modernized. 现代化了。在我看来 is used to express in my view. It's similar to 我认为 I think or 要我说 if you ask me. 无论怎么变 no matter how these courtyard homes change, they still are an important representation of life in Beijing. 无论 is regardless of, no matter what. Let's take a look at that part again.
这儿的四合院还和以前一样吗？
不，已经啊有很大不同了。大部分四合院的格局都已经改变了。
你看，那还有空调。我觉得四合院的生活也变得现代化了。
嗨，在我看来，这儿无论怎么变，都是北京生活最重要的代表。
Let's take a bit of a break now and talk a little bit more about the Hutongs in Beijing. As we explained earlier, these refer to the narrow alleyways in the older parts of Beijing that connect the 四合院, the courtyard homes. The Hutongs date originally from the Yuan dynasty, although at least one Hutong can be dated back to the Liao dynasty before that. That's over 900 years ago. It's estimated that there were approximately 6,000 Hutongs around 1950. Recent development has changed the face of many Hutongs, but often the modern streets retain their historic name. For example, Goldfish Hutong, 金鱼 Hutong, is now a wide street and home to 5-star hotels, but it still retains its name as a Hutong. Some of the most significant Hutongs are now protected as cultural relics, and any modern development has to preserve the nature of the Hutong. These alleyways, the Hutong, and the courtyard homes, 四合院, that they link and connect, form the physical basis for the traditional family life in Beijing. They also provide the structure for a harmonious neighborhood. Often, several families would live together in one 四合院, one courtyard home. So the courtyard was a public space for all to share. Other times, several courtyard homes would share public facilities like washrooms and bathhouses. Now, the family has always been the foundation of society in China, but there is a saying in Beijing that 远亲不如近邻. 远亲不如近邻. Distant relatives are not as important as close neighbors. So these neighborhoods were vital in providing a living space that everyone could share. Many people nowadays prefer living in the Hutongs to the modern houses and high-rise apartments, even though the Hutongs often do not have modern plumbing or even heating systems. After all, the Hutongs and the courtyard homes were built to reflect Chinese philosophy and feng shui, which is a Chinese term that is becoming much more common in the West. For example, most courtyard homes have their main entrance on the south side so that you can 坐北朝南, sit in the north and face south, 坐北朝南, just as the emperor does in his palace. There are 门墩, as we learned in this lesson, to guard the entrance, and a 屏风, a screen wall, just inside the entrance to deflect evil spirits. Trees are planted in the courtyard to enhance the qi, or the spiritual energy. Of course, these also have a very practical side. The screen, or 屏风, also blocks the view from passers-by, and the trees provide shade for the summer. But in all, Hutongs were designed as a comfortable place for families and neighbors to live, and at least some of that lifestyle still survives to this day. Now let's take a closer look at some of the language points that came up in today's dialogue. For example, 忍不住. Now, 忍 is to bear or to tolerate something. 忍不住 means you can't resist. For example, 烤鸭太好吃了. 虽然我害怕长胖, 但还是忍不住多吃了几口. Roast duck tastes too good. Now we say roast duck, it could be Peking duck. 烤鸭太好吃了, it tastes too good. 虽然我害怕长胖, although I'm afraid of gaining weight, 长胖. 但还是忍不住多吃了几口, but I couldn't resist having a few extra bites.
没错，里边有一个院子，开着门，我就忍不住走进去看看。
Here's another language point. 碰钉子, to run into a problem. Now, 钉子 literally means a nail, to hit a nail. You can imagine if you're sawing through a piece of wood and there's a nail inside, that would be a problem. You'd hit the nail. 碰钉子. For instance, 求人帮忙要有礼貌，免得碰钉子. When you're asking someone for help, you should be polite. Otherwise, you might have a problem. You might run into a problem. 求人帮忙要有礼貌，免得碰钉子。
不过里面出来了一个人问我您找谁，吓得我赶紧溜掉了。
碰了个钉子吧。
Let's take a look at the conjunction 或者 or, indicating a choice of two or more options. Instead of 或者, we can also just say 或. For example, 你明天或者后天来都行，我都有空。You can come tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. I have time both ways. Either day is fine with me.
那可不一定。原来啊，有钱的人是一家人住一个或者几个四合院，没钱的人呢是很多家人合住一个四合院。
Now let's take a particular phrase from today's lesson and do some substitution exercises. That's 在 somebody 看来, in somebody's view. Now usually this is used with 我在我看来 in my view, but it can also be used, for instance, in 在他看来 in his view, in somebody else's view. Let's look at two examples. 在我看来到茶馆去看京剧很有意思. In my view, going to watch Peking opera at a tea house is very interesting.
在我看来，中国菜很油腻。
在我看来，中国菜很油腻。
在中国人看来，春节是一个很重要的节日。
在中国人看来，春节是一个很重要的节日。
Today we explored around the old alleyways of Beijing known as Hutong, and we learned some very useful language like 我忍不住笑了, I couldn't bear it anymore and had to laugh, I broke out laughing. We also learned 闲得没事干, to be bored with nothing to do, in which case you might want to 出去溜达溜达, to go out for a casual stroll. If you run into a problem, you could say 我碰钉子了, I ran into a problem. Now, 钉子, literally a nail, that refers to a small problem, usually something you can work out. If it's more serious, you might 碰壁, to run into a wall, in which case you might be stumped. Well, that's all the time we have for today, but in the next lesson, we're going to go back to this Hohai area of Beijing and explore the old neighborhoods a little bit more. So join us then on Travel in Chinese. Bye-bye. 再见.